Welcome back. Well, before the invasion, President Bush and Dick Cheney, the vice president, continually dismissed all claims of evidence that might have stopped military action. 3 months before the invasion, MI6 told the British Prime Minister Tony Blair that Saddam Hussein had no weapons of mass destruction. The intelligence was passed to the US but was buried by the White House. On February 5th, 2003, Colin Powell presented a report to the UNSC making the case for war and saying that intelligence reports proved that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. A few years later, he said that his report was based on faulty intelligence. On October the 2nd, approximately 6 months after the US invasion, the Iraq Inspection Group reported that no weapons of mass destruction had been found. By January 2004, Dick Cheney still insisted that Saddam Hussein had a lengthy history of reckless behavior and sudden aggression. His regime cultivated ties to terror, including the Al-Qaeda network, and had built, possessed and used weapons of mass destruction. Well, we're still joined by our guests in Washington, D.C., Phyllis Bennis, also in D.C., Jack BURKMAN, and in London, Anas at TIKRITI. Phyllis Bennis, 5 years on since the invasion, I'm going to have to go to something Jack BURKMAN said. He said there have been improvements in Iraq, haven't they? We saw a recent agreement by the Iraqi parliament who voted to keep the US troops in the country until 2011. The very fact that the parliament can get together and vote on something means there's some sort of improvement, isn't it?
Well, it depends how you interpret it. Certainly there are people in Baghdad, in the government and in the parliament, who have been empowered in a whole new way. The Shia majority, which was disproportionately discriminated against under Saddam Hussein, has risen to be a dominant power. Now, I think that most Iraqis will say that the existence of a parliament is not enough to compensate for the loss of a very advanced, overwhelmingly middle-class society with very advanced education and healthcare levels, a society that had one of the smallest wealth-poverty gaps in the entire Arab world. For all of the repression of the Saddam Hussein years, which was horrific, the standard of living in terms of economic and social rights for Iraqis was very high. And the destruction of that, of a largely urban, developed society that suddenly has no more than 2 to 4 hours a day of electricity. Water is rationed to 1 to 2 hours a day in almost all of the country, with the exception of parts of the Green Zone, the US-controlled part of Baghdad. You know, the conditions of life are still horrific. And as we see today, people are still being killed in large numbers. The division of Baghdad into tiny enclaves, walled off, literally block by block, walled off, looking like a maze, very much in parallel with what the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories is looking like, with its separation wall, dividing communities, showing that the kind of ethnic cleansing that went on within these wars in Iraq has succeeded into dividing what was once a very vibrant and multicultural society into tiny ethnic enclaves. It's a destruction of an ancient and very vibrant society. So the question of who paid the price is a very, very powerful one.
A nation divided and destroyed, says Phyllis Bennis. Jack BURKMAN, what do you make of that?
Well, I guess the message there is that dictators work, so leave them alone. That's what they want. It's working for everybody. It's just that George Bush had a different vision. He wants to lead people out of the 9th century. He wants to lead that region out of darkness, and this was the way to do it. It's not just a question of Iraq. I mean, some of what she says about Iraq is true, but after 9/11, the U.S. had to make, as the world's hegemon, had to make changes in the Mideast. The region wasn't working for the U.S., it wasn't working for Europe,
but you keep talking about after 9/11. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. It's been proven.
Well, it depends how you look at that. Even if there are no links to even if there are no links between Al-Qaeda and Saddam, and I'm not sure that that's the case, but even if that's the case, the reality is that entities like Al-Qaeda only exist because of all the support from radical Arab regimes. Saddam Hussein over the years has contributed mightily to terrorism in the world. There's no question about that. Nobody can dispute that. If you didn't have this radical Arabism in the Mideast, you would never have organizations like Al-Qaeda.
All right, Anas TIKRITI, the US invasion took your country out of the 9th century, says Mr. BURKMAN.
It's this kind of arrogance that is unfortunately isolating the American people, sadly, because of the faults of the administration, the entire American people are suffering as a result in the eyes of the entire world. You know, rhetoric such as that, bigoted, I'm sorry to say, almost racist, you know, leading people bigoted? Out of darkness to light. How dare you claim that Iraq was living in darkness? How dare you, the cradle of civilizations, where more than a million scholars, where more than intellectuals. No, hang on. You are supporting, your regime is supporting dictators around the world. You came and picked on Iraq because of one particular reason, and that was oil. Don't make it a thing about driving people from darkness to light. That is a racist, that is an extremely offensive rhetoric that you should be ashamed of yourself for saying. However, I would say this. Ashamed you say Al-Qaeda and Iraq. I'll tell you, yes, absolutely. Let me finish. In Iraq, despite the dark days of Saddam, despite the dark days of the Ba'athists, which was once again propped up by subsequent successive American administrations, there was not one single suicide bombing. There was not one single terrorist anywhere, either in Iraq or around the world, that came from Iraq. Iraq never ever saw the kind of bombings that we saw in the aftermath of the invasion and the illegal occupation. Iraq became a hotbed of terrorism simply because the Bush strategy in Iraq made it possible for Al-Qaeda and other groups to come and make Iraq that hotbed of terrorism. So unfortunately, despite the fact that George W. Bush and his cronies and people who prop him up, such as Jack Burkman, may feel that they have a reason to hold up their heads high, try telling that to the Iraqi people. Okay. Try telling that to children who for the past 10 years haven't had a life to speak about.
All right, Anas, I want to bring Phyllis Bennis in here. Phyllis, let's look forward now and look at the President-elect Barack Obama. He has promised to withdraw the troops. Do you think that it will be wise of him to withdraw the troops before the date agreed in this agreement between the US and Iraq, 2011, or do you think that 3 years is an adequate amount of time?
No, I think it's very important that they be withdrawn much before that. The agreement, of course, says that the United States can withdraw troops at any time. The problem that we face is that while Barack Obama campaigned on the notion that he would end the war, his actual strategy was not an end to the complete occupation. It was to withdraw what he identifies as combat troops, which is an official term within the military. But clearly, all the troops in Iraq are engaged in or in danger of having to engage in combat. So the real end of the war is going to be made possible only by starting with the withdrawal of the U.S. troops. There are many wars now in Iraq that have been created by the U.S. occupation. The end of the U.S. occupation will not end all of those wars, but only with the end of the U.S. occupation, meaning all the troops and all the mercenaries, and closing the bases and stopping the effort to control the oil. That will make possible.
Right. Okay, let's go to Jack Burkman. Sorry to interrupt you, Phyllis. We are running out of time. Jack Burkman, you were singing the praises of George Bush's strategy in Iraq. I'm assuming that you're not too optimistic about what Barack Obama is promising regarding Iraq.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think Obama will have much choice. I think the U.S. will have to be there. I mean, I want them out. George Bush wants them out as soon as possible. I mean, we have 2, 3, 4 years or more. I don't think there's any way to do it without seeing the whole, without seeing just a terrible problem in that region. But let me ask you this. Everybody's focused, Phyllis, your other guests, we're all focused on the downside. What if it works? What about the upside? What about the potential? What if Iraq works? What if George Bush succeeds in creating a thriving, vibrant democracy in the heart of the Mideast? Has anyone ever thought of the upside potential of this for the region and the world?
Not with 1 million people dead. No, there is no upside for 1 million people to die.
How many did Saddam kill, Phyllis? How many did Saddam kill?
Well, the estimates are several 100,000 with our help. I don't think we need to add to that bloody legacy.
All right, let me give Anas TIKRITI a final word. There's about 45 seconds left on the program.
Well, in my book, what starts with a lie doesn't really end very, very well. And George W. Bush has admitted, sort of regrets in a sense. No apology though. Sort of regrets the false information, although it's not his fault once again. However, it comes 6 years too late, and unfortunately, more than 1 million people who have perished as a result of his fallacy are not here to see his expression of regret. It's wrong, and I unfortunately don't see a short-term kind of resolution of the crisis that is Iraq. And unfortunately, it won't work, Jack. Believe me, it won't work.
Gentlemen and Ms. Bennis, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us here on Inside Story. It's a fascinating discussion. And thank you so much, the viewer, for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and your suggestions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye-bye for now.